All right. I am here with Keegan White, Empowerment Coach. She believes that she has been placed here on the planet to teach people how to heal. She supports them in helping them heal their patterns, their habits, and beliefs that have been holding them back and keeping them stuck. Thank you, Keegan, so much for joining me for my interview series. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Christy, for asking me. I'm
Of
super
course.
excited. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So, I'd love to hear more about what led you. I know, but the folks out in the wide world may not know what led you to your work that you're doing now. So, if you tell us about your story.
Yeah, so just the concise version of the very long journey of my life.
Yeah.
I have been in this process for about a little over 11 years. I've been in recovery from drugs and alcohol, and up until that point I had really struggled with alcohol for a very long time, and then towards the last 2 years of my active addiction, crystal meth in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that stemmed from my mother getting sick when I was 17, and then when I was 22 she passed away. And so I just had a extremely difficult time coping with that loss, because she and I were so extremely close. And so once I was blessed and fortunate to find recovery, I have just, it's basically been my mission to help other people, and whether that's been through coming over addiction through drugs and alcohol, but also helping people overcome just patterns and habits and limiting beliefs. Because being immersed in that culture of recovery with that particular group of people for a very long time, I really thought that only addicts thought that way. And then I started teaching yoga, and I started realizing, oh my gosh, regular people think this way too. So it became really apparent to me that I wanted to take what I learned from being in recovery, and then what I'd taken from learning from teaching yoga, and kind of create a program that could really support all kinds of different people. Because at the end of the day, we all really think and feel many of the same thoughts and feelings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's we're all having this human experience. And so, although we have events that have led us to varying points within this life, we all are human, and it's true. We can talk ourselves into all kinds of things and create habits around that. So I think that's fantastic that you have been led to a place where you're a way seer, and I love that, and I think it's fantastic. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate it. Coming from a family of addicts, and of individuals who have thought patterns and habits that are not always very healthy, I certainly can appreciate and recognize the work that you're doing. So I just want to say thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. So I'd love to talk about about intuition, right? Because that's what we're here to talk about today. Do you feel like you're intuitive?
I do feel like I'm intuitive.
Okay. How do you feel like that shows up for you, or is it more of like a feeling versus like a maybe a third eye visual type of a experience?
It's more of a feeling for me.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely, even ironically, even in my active addiction, was intuitive and knew that like
Mm-hmm.
the people that I was hanging out with, my body was screaming like, "What are you doing? Why are you hanging out with these people?" And yet my head was just like on autopilot, because I was just caught up in active addiction. So intuition is something that I'm very in tune with. And so it's definitely more of a feeling. And then now that I've been more in the recovery process, kind of figuring out what that means more, it's definitely, it's so hard to describe, because I just know. And that's when I know, like, I'm in the groove, is because you just know. You don't have to describe it or explain it. It's just, I know.
Oh yeah. It's but to me, I don't know, maybe even in that knowing, even in that moment, it's still, there's something palpable about what that feels like. What your body feels like when you have that sense of just knowing. Um, for me, it's like this very grounded feeling, but this very open and almost airy feeling, like my solar plexus aren't, tight, they're open and loose, and there's just this overarching feeling of yes in my body, and then the knowing, all of the details that come just from doing the work that I do, those come as well. But that's really interesting. And I find it fascinating that even through all of the experiences that you were going through when you were active in your addiction, that you could still recognize, oh, wait a minute, it wasn't, you were still, your higher self was probably screaming at you.
Oh, my higher self was in battle with my high self, for
Yeah.
sure.
Right.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So that being said, obviously your intuition played a part in making decisions at that point. Maybe not making them, but at least an awareness around your decisions.
Right.
Do you feel like the work that you're doing now, that you're very guided by your intuition, either with your interactions with your clients, or just in your daily activities and yogic practice?
What was the question again?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
How do you feel you're using your intuition with your clients
Uh-huh.
and during your daily yogic practice?
So how I feel I'm using my intuition with my clients would
Mm-hmm.
be that um, I have been working with people for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work with people, especially one-on-one, you start to learn people pretty much kind of have the same habits and patterns. And we come from a lot of the same beliefs. And so intuitively, after working with people for so long, it's a lot easier now to recognize those habits and patterns in people, because again, they're pretty much the same in a lot of different people. So I'm able to apply that intuition working with clients. And then in my yogic practice, I would say that because that looks very different, like I think a lot of people think of yoga practice as getting on the yoga mat and like on a physical sense, intuitively. I used to just, there was no intuition and not in that area. I used to just get on the mat. I'm a competitive dancer background, so I just get on my yoga mat and it was like, how much can I force my body to do these poses? So there was like no intuition. And then many injuries later, I've learned that when I practice the physical asana part, there is so much more intuition, because it is such a moment by moment practice based on where my body is, because I do have so many limitations now because of the injuries. But then I'd also say that intuition plays a role in seated meditation, but more often when I'm out walking in nature, because that's when I really feel the most connected to my intuition and to my highest self and to a spiritual something greater than myself, is when those moments when I'm moving my body, but I'm also thinking and allowing my mind to just do what it naturally does. Because I can sit in my office and the stuff that comes out of my mouth and stuff that comes around my head, I'm like, this is bullshit. I've got to get outside. As soon as it's like something about the fresh air and moving my body and just walking, it's like it all just comes out and there it is.
Yes. I found sometimes that it's almost like those moments, like when you're in the shower and you're like, oh, I have to remember this idea, or it just comes to you. And so you're like walking outside, and even last time I was like walking my dog, and you just get clear. You just get so present in those moments that this divine, beautiful inspiration comes.
Yes.
And then I'm like, I need a mini recorder.
You know,
I'm like, how am I have to remember this now?
sometimes I'll go for walks and I'll prep for like a Facebook Live. And so in my head, it's this glorious, eloquent soliloquy of just
Yeah.
beautifulness. And then I get on Facebook Live and it's like, bleh. I'm like, where were you a minute ago, Facebook Live?
Right. Yeah, it's like those moments of like divine inspiration versus like, how do I want to plan it,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 for
Yeah.
sure.
So they recognizing that, okay, well, maybe it's not always so great when I plan it and just let it flow,
Right.
be in the flow, and recognizing that no matter what happens, I will be divinely inspired, and what comes out of my mouth is what is meant to be said.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what would you say would be one of your most memorable moments? And it can be in your life, it can be in your work, where you really followed your intuition, followed your gut instinct. Like, what's the most memorable moment that you can recall?
Followed my gut instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had this really cool experience, and this isn't quite gut instinct, but this is, I think, connecting to something greater, and whether it's like a spirit or whether it's universe or whether it's just my highest self being able to speak above. But I did have this really amazing moment several about how what did I want to name the yoga retreat. And it was like I was having this conversation with somebody else, but it was in my head. It was the most interesting thing I think I've ever experienced. But it was literally, I was having this minute dialogue about how to name it. And it was like the words reclaiming the sacred soul. Like it was just coming to me from outside, and it was just so cool. And so that's been the kind of, not the kind of, that's been what I've been calling the yoga retreat and the coaching program. And now I'm going to launch a telesummit. So that's also going to be reclaiming the sacred soul. So that's been really cool to just have that experience of working with something greater than myself. But I think going back to that gut feeling, I think the most profound gut, well, this isn't me actually acting on it. This is me not acting on it. But I think the most profound was.
You can share that too, because I mean, I've certainly had moments where, my higher self was trying to hit me over the head with a baseball bat. And I was like, what? I'm ignoring you. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So okay, so I have two examples. So one is not listening, and two would be listening. So the first one is 13 years ago, meeting a guy who, this is when I had just started using drugs, and he was a drug dealer, and like everything in my body was screaming, do not talk to him, do not date him. And obviously, not obviously because you don't know the story, but I ended up dating him for 2 years, and it ended up being just a super screwed up, horrific relationship, a lot of control, a lot of abuse. And like that, from that point on, I swore I would never not listen to my intuition again, because it was so loud, and I still just ignored it and did it anyway. And then I think probably another positive example is when I met my partner now, Noel. When I met him, it was instant magnet. I mean, just so deeply connected. And there was no question of, is he the one? Does he like me? Should I call him? None of that. None of that was there. It was just so seamless. And it just, everything in my body was saying, yes, this is him. This is the soulmate. So it was a nice little amends I could make to myself with that one.
Yeah. Especially you're like, okay, I'm really following my intuition this time. I think that's a beautiful way of really, coming to terms with the fact that, our soul knows. Our soul knows what our brain doesn't always recognize, or wants us to recognize. We talk ourselves out of things all the time, of what we believe is healthy for us, and all those, like you said, all those habits and thought patterns that creep up, and our mutual friend Leanna, she was talking about the monkey mind,
Mm-hmm.
and how we can spin circles around in our head, and it almost feels like it's like a distraction technique,
Mm-hmm.
that we create for ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
It's to deter us from digging deep, getting to the core wound, so that we can heal that, and then heal and create new patterns and create new thoughts.
Yeah,
So.
when I first came into recovery, I had a really hard time, because once you put one substance down, you start picking up something else, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's just a normal cycle of addiction. And for me, food has been an ongoing just battle. Love, hate, struggle, ease. And someone has suggested the book "Women, Food, and God" by Janine Roth,
Uh-huh.
and it talks about is what the mind creates. It's not reality. And that was profound. It doesn't like spinning mind around about whether it's food or sex or boyfriend or money or whatever. It's not about that situation. I made a video not too long ago about my hair. It's not about, I was obsessing about my hair. It's not about the hair. It's not about anything to be obsessed about. It's about, this is a tool that the mind is creating so that we don't have to do what you just said about not getting into the wound of what's really going on in the moment.
Right. And tell me the name of the book again, because I think our connection got a little fuzzy there.
Women, Food, and God, and that's by Janine Roth.
Okay.
Such a great book.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're the second person in a day who's mentioned that book. I was like, I think I need to be paying attention.
It's a great book, for sure.
Yeah. Wonderful. So a couple other questions. Do you feel like your success has been in part or in whole, whichever, attributed to your ability to now listen to your intuition?
I definitely do, and I also think there's so many moving pieces to answer that question. Yes,
Right.
intuition's a huge part of it, and I would also say spirituality is another huge part of it, and those for me are very much intertwined. And then I would also say the success of where I'm at is just being so willing to not give up no matter what, and to really challenge my mindset, because our minds are master manipulators. And we just talked about how that obsession and how it's something the mind creates. And it's I think success for me has just come from that willingness of just constantly investigating, constantly questioning, constantly going against what my mind is saying, and being really willing to do whatever it takes to shift out of whatever it is that I'm going through, no matter what life throws us. Yeah.
So do you feel like there's a pattern within the pattern? So, I mean, obviously without getting too personal, but do you feel like there's a pattern in your clients of like an overarching habit that we've created, maybe an idea of what you believe society has created as a habit, like a thought pattern that maybe we can take a look at?
Oh yeah. I mean, hands down, the number one pattern that I see with people, and I do think that society plays a huge role in it, is that we're not good enough. Society, especially with advertising, that don't even get me going.
Yeah.
Just bombards us, women and men, just with all these messages that we've got to look a certain way, act a certain way, drive a certain car, make a certain amount of money, live this certain lifestyle. And if you don't do all these things, then you're not perfect. And even if you do all those things, you're still not perfect.
You're still, yeah. You're still not measuring up somehow. Yeah.
You're still not good enough. Yeah, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what clients show up with, whether it's
Mm.
they have stuff going on with food, or whether it's stuff going on with relationships. It all comes down to their core belief, and they're
Mm.
all of them are showing up with this belief of feeling unworthy.
Mm.
Yeah,
Wow.
not good enough, unworthy.
Wow. So
Mhm.
what would be one of your tips that you would maybe give as guidance to someone who would be showing up that way?
Gosh, I think that's such an inside job. There's so much inside work to be done, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that has worked for me, and I still do it, is I do a gratitude journal in the mornings, but I started adding in a worthiness piece of it, because
Mm.
I'm no different than anybody else. Worthiness is a huge component for me. So
Yeah.
regardless of if I have a goal, that's where I really focus on the worthiness piece. So that would be my suggestion to someone is, if you're working with something, you're really taking some time to investigate that worthiness piece, because that is that is for me key in starting to shift the mindset, is starting
Mm.
to address that.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it makes sense, because if you don't believe that you're worthy to even have a different thought or
Yeah,
create a new pattern,
yeah.
it's let alone, worthiness to receive whatever amount of money or whatever car or whatever, it depends on how entrenched you are in that
Mm-hmm.
mindset, for sure.
And most people don't even realize how entrenched that mindset is. Like I have been doing some deep work for almost 12 years, and I'm always blown away when it comes up, and I'm like, didn't think about it being from that angle. Like you think you work through so much stuff, and then it comes in a different way, and you're like, damn, there it is again.
Yeah. You're like, didn't I do this work already? What's going on? Again? Yeah.
You again. And then that's where you get to say, like, instead of being like, you know, throwing out a bunch of cuss words, you again, like, we get to say compassion, like, there you are again.
Yeah, like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So good to see you again.
Yes. And that's part, you mentioned at the beginning, the human experience.
Mm.
That's the human experience, like we'll never be rid of all these samskaras or patterns. We'll never be rid of all of these negative thoughts. I mean, that is just the only way we get rid of it is when we move on, because
Mhm.
it's just, that is part of being a human being.
Right.
I think when we can remember that, and we can remember that we're human, and that's where that compassion piece can be so important, because gosh, we're just doing the very best that we can, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And having that ease, the gentleness with ourselves,
Mhm.
and then being also the observer of the thought and not be the thought,
Right.
and 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 allowing yourself some grace, I think, as you learn how to do that, right? Because it just doesn't come like piece of cake. it
Right.
takes some practice.
Uh-huh.
So that ease and grace, is so important.
Absolutely.
So important. Well, thank you so much for joining me today,
Yeah.
Keegan. What's
Great,
the
thanks for asking.
what's the best way that folks can get in touch with you?
On the website, so that's www.keeganwhitecoaching.com, and Keegan is spelled Keegan. Keegan White,
Awesome.
coaching.com.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much. I
thank
really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
you, and I appreciate you and the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Thank you.